Adrian Cross had spent his entire life making sure no locked door existed without his permission, so when he found one hidden behind his late mother's bookcase, he knew before touching the handle that someone had betrayed him. The key was taped beneath the bottom shelf, exactly where she used to hide birthday money when he was a boy. It slid into the lock with a soft click. The room beyond smelled of stale air, dust, and something painfully human. Adrian stepped inside and found a starving Omega curled against the far wall, clutching a sealed letter with Adrian's name written across the front. For 1 second, Adrian did nothing. He had faced armed men without blinking. He had watched rivals beg across polished tables. But the sight of the young man on the floor stripped every practiced response from him. The Omega's clothes hung loosely from his frame. One bare foot was swollen at the ankle. His lips were cracked, and his fingers were locked so tightly around the envelope that the paper had bent beneath them. His eyes opened at the sound of Adrian's shoes. Gray. Alert despite the exhaustion. Terrified, Adrian lowered his gun. "I'm not going to hurt you." The Omega pushed himself farther into the corner. There was nowhere to go. Adrian felt that fact like an accusation. Behind him, 2 of his men waited in the doorway. One reached for his phone. "Call Dr. Mercer," Adrian said. "No police. No one else comes upstairs." "Boss, we should secure him first." Adrian turned his head just enough to make the man stop speaking. He can barely sit up. When Adrian faced the Omega again, the envelope had disappeared against his chest. Hidden or protected? Maybe both. "What's your name?" No answer. "Do you understand me?" A shallow nod. Adrian took 1 step closer. The Omega's breathing quickened. Adrian stopped. The room was small enough that he could have crossed it in 3 strides. Instead, he removed his coat and placed it on the floor between them. "You're cold." The Omega stared at the coat as if it might close around his wrists. Adrian had negotiated hostage exchanges with less resistance. He knew how to demand compliance. He had no idea how to offer warmth to someone who expected every kindness to carry a lock. "Water," the Omega whispered. The word was rough enough to scrape. Adrian glanced toward the doorway. "Bring a bottle." Unopened. His men moved immediately. That was the world Adrian understood, an order, then obedience. But when the water arrived, the Omega shrank from the man holding it. Adrian took the bottle himself, broke the seal where he could see, then crouched several feet away. "I'm leaving it here." He set it beside the coat and moved back. The Omega watched him for a long moment before crawling forward. He lifted the bottle with shaking hands and drank too quickly. Adrian reached out on instinct. "Slow down." The Omega flinched so hard water spilled across his shirt. Adrian withdrew his hand at once. "Sorry." The word felt unfamiliar in his mouth. One of his men looked at him, then wisely looked away. The Omega drank again, slower this time. Color did not return to his face, but the panic in his eyes eased by a fraction. Adrian let himself breathe. His gaze moved around the room. A narrow cot, an empty water jug, several food wrappers folded into a precise stack. No windows, no phone, no obvious second exit. His mother's private sitting room had been on the other side of this wall. She had spent years here while Adrian ran an empire below her feet, and somehow a man had been hidden 10 yards from where she took her afternoon tea. He looked back at the envelope. His name was written in his mother's hand. He would have known it anywhere. The sharp A, the careful spacing, the final stroke under Cross. Grief rose without warning, hot and unwelcome. He forced it down. The Omega noticed. That unsettled Adrian more than the letter. "Did she put you here?" he asked. The young man's grip tightened. Adrian heard the mistake as soon as the question left him. Too direct. Too much like an interrogation. The Omega's face closed. "Forget that." Adrian stood slowly. "You don't have to answer me now." Suspicion flickered across the Omega's expression, as if permission itself might be a trick. Dr. Mercer arrived minutes later with a medical bag and the careful neutrality of someone who had worked for Adrian long enough not to ask questions in hallways. She stopped at the doorway when she saw the Omega. "I need space." Adrian's security chief stepped forward. "He's holding something addressed to the boss. And if you take it from him," Mercer said, "you may send him into shock." Adrian looked at the Omega. The letter mattered. Whatever his mother had written could explain the room, the secrecy, perhaps the last months of her life. But the man holding it was struggling to stay conscious. Adrian made the decision before his instincts could turn it into strategy. No one touches the letter. His security chief frowned. Adrian, that includes you. The Omega's eyes lifted to his for the first time without immediately darting away. Not trust. Nothing close. But recognition. Adrian pointed to Dr. Mercer. She's a doctor. She'll ask before she touches you. Then, to Mercer, if he says stop, you stop. Mercer nodded once. The Omega studied Adrian as though measuring the distance between those words and what would actually happen. Finally, he gave the smallest nod. As Mercer approached, Adrian moved toward the door. The Omega's hand shot out, not toward Adrian, but toward the abandoned coat. His fingers caught the sleeve and pulled it close. Adrian paused. What's your name? He asked again, quieter this time. The answer came after a long silence. Evan. Adrian repeated it once. Evan. The young man's eyes closed, but his hand stayed wrapped around both the coat and the letter. Adrian stepped into the hall and shut the door only halfway. His men waited for instructions. So did the house. So did the dead woman whose handwriting had just reached out from a sealed envelope. Adrian looked at the narrow opening he had deliberately left beside the door. For the first time since inheriting everything his mother owned, he did not know what belonged to him, what had been hidden from him, or what right he had to demand the truth. He knew only this. Evan would not be questioned, moved, or touched until he was stable. After that, Adrian would have to decide whether to place him inside the machinery that handled every threat to the Cross family, or stand between Evan and that machinery himself. Adrian kept Evan in his mother's wing because moving him through the main house would have turned a medical emergency into a spectacle. By dawn, the locked room had been sealed, the hallway cleared, and every camera feed from the previous 48 hours copied to an offline drive. None of it made Adrian feel in control. It only made the gaps more visible. Dr. Mercer stepped out of the guest room and closed the door softly behind her. Severe dehydration. Malnutrition. His ankle is sprained, not broken. No immediate signs of infection. Adrian looked past her toward the half-open door. How long? I can't give you an exact number yet. The physical decline suggests days without proper food, not months. He had access to water until recently. That answered one question and created three more. Can he be moved? Physically? Later today, maybe. Emotionally? Mercer folded her arms. That depends on whether you plan to treat him like a patient or evidence. Adrian's security chief, Nolan Price, stood 10 feet away with the expression of a man enduring an insult for professional reasons. He was found inside a restricted room with a letter addressed to Adrian. Evidence isn't an unreasonable word. Mercer glanced at him. Neither is trauma. Adrian ended the argument with a look. No one questions him. Nolan's jaw tightened. We don't know who he is. We know he can barely stand. That doesn't make him harmless. Adrian felt the old instinct rise. Contain the risk, isolate the variables, make everyone obey until the truth surfaced. It had kept him alive for years. It had also made Evan flinch when Adrian reached for a water bottle. He stays under my protection, Adrian said. No restraints. No armed guard inside the room. No one takes the letter. Nolan's silence lasted a beat too long. And if he tries to leave? Adrian looked at the door. He can't walk. That wasn't my question. No, it wasn't. Adrian turned back to him. Post 2 men at the end of the hall. Out of sight. If he asks for the door open, it stays open. Nolan studied him as if waiting for the rest of the order. There wasn't one. Understood. When Adrian entered the guest room, Evan was awake. He sat propped against the headboard in one of the housekeeper's clean shirts, the sleeves rolled twice around his wrists. Adrian's coat lay folded beside him. The letter remained tucked beneath his hand. A tray rested on the table nearby. Broth, toast, sliced pear. Untouched. Evan's eyes went first to Adrian, then to the door behind him. Adrian left it open. Mercer says you need to eat. Evan looked at the tray. She said slowly. His voice was still rough, but stronger than it had been in the hidden room. That sounds like eating with additional rules. Evan's mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough to surprise Adrian. You seem comfortable with rules. Usually. Adrian moved to the chair by the window, but didn't sit until Evan gave no sign of objecting. Not these. Evan picked up the spoon, then set it down again. Where am I? A guest room in my mother's wing. His fingers tightened against the blanket. Is the door locked? No, will it stay that way? Adrian could have said yes immediately. Instead, he heard Nolan's warning in his head, and considered every threat he had not yet identified. Evan watched the hesitation happen. The small change in his face felt sharper than accusation. Adrian stood, crossed to the door, and removed the key from the inside lock. He placed it on the table beside Evan's tray. "You keep it." Evan stared at the key. "That doesn't stop someone locking it from outside. There is no exterior lock. You're asking me to trust that?" "No." Adrian returned to the chair. "I'm telling you to check." Evan looked at him for a long moment. Then he pushed the blanket aside and tried to stand. Pain crossed his face before his injured foot reached the floor. Adrian rose on instinct. Evan's shoulders went rigid. Adrian stopped where he was. "I can call Mercer. I can check a door. Not if you fall before you reach it." Evan's eyes narrowed. There it was, stubbornness, intact beneath the exhaustion. Adrian found it inconveniently reassuring. He moved the chair closer to the bed and turned it so the back could serve as support. "Use that. I won't touch you." Evan hesitated, then gripped the chair and made his slow way to the door. He inspected the frame, the handle, the hall beyond. The two guards were invisible from where he stood. Adrian had made sure of it. Evan tested the door twice before returning to the bed. His breathing was shallow from the effort, but some tension had left his shoulders. He picked up the spoon and took one careful mouthful of broth. Adrian remained silent until Evan had swallowed 3 more. "What happened to the water in that room?" he asked. Evan froze. Adrian regretted the question immediately, but this time he did not retract it. The answer mattered to Evan's survival. "You don't have to tell me anything else." Evan glanced toward the open door. The pipe stopped. "What pipe?" There was a small tap behind the cabinet. "It worked until 2 days ago." Adrian kept his face still. His mother's room had no plumbing on any plan he had ever seen. And food, left outside the inner panel. Evan's gaze dropped to the broth. Not every day. Adrian felt cold settle beneath his ribs. Someone had maintained the room. Someone had known Evan was there. And recently, that system had failed or been abandoned. Who brought it? Evan's hand moved over the letter. "I never saw them." Adrian could have pushed. Nolan would have. The version of Adrian who existed yesterday would have called silence obstruction and applied pressure until it broke. Instead, he looked at the key beside the tray. "All right." Evan glanced up, clearly suspicious of the lack of force. Adrian stood. "You'll stay here until Mercer clears you to move safely." Evan's expression closed at once. "I'm not staying locked in this wing." "You're not locked in. There are guards." So he had noticed them after all. Adrian almost smiled. "At the end of the hall." "That's not better. They're there because whoever knew about that room may still be in this house." Evan went still. Adrian had not meant to frighten him, but softening the truth would have been another form of control. "You deserve to know that," he said. "You also deserve a choice. Mercer can move you to a clinic under another name, or you can stay here while I find out who had access." Evan studied him, weighing danger against danger. "If I stay, no one takes the letter." "Agreed. No one comes in without asking." Adrian nodded. "Agreed. And the door stays open unless I close it." The demand was small. The cost to Adrian's instincts was not. "Agreed." Evan looked down at the key, then took another spoonful of broth. It was not trust, but it was a decision. Adrian stepped into the hall and found Nolan waiting beyond the corner. "Pull the original renovation records for this wing," Adrian said. Quietly. "I want every contractor, employee, and private nurse who had access during my mother's last year." Nolan glanced toward the open guest room door. "And him?" Adrian looked back. Evan was still eating, slowly, one hand resting over the unopened letter. "His name is Evan. For now, that's all anyone in this house needs to know." By the 3rd morning, Evan had stopped watching the open door every time footsteps passed in the hall. He still noticed them. Adrian could tell by the slight pause before each breath, the way his fingers tightened around the edge of the breakfast tray. But he no longer looked ready to run on an injured ankle. That counted as progress. Adrian entered carrying a paper bag from a bakery across town. Evan eyed it with suspicion. Dr. Mercer approved toast. "This is toast with better public relations." Adrian set the bag on the table and stepped back. Evan opened it carefully. Inside was a plain roll, still warm, and a small container of honey. "You sent someone across the city for bread?" "The kitchen made 6 versions. You rejected all of them. They put herbs in toast." "I've already addressed the situation." Evan looked up. "Did you threaten the chef?" "I expressed disappointment." So yes. The corner of Evan's mouth lifted. It was the first real smile Adrian had seen from him, brief and reluctant. Then Evan lowered his eyes as if he had revealed too much. Adrian pretended not to notice. He took the chair near the window, leaving the path to the door clear. The key remained on Evan's bedside table. It had not moved since Adrian placed it there. Nolan found the plumbing, Adrian said. Evan's smile disappeared, but he did not close himself off completely. Behind the cabinet, a narrow line connected to the old bathroom pipes. It was installed 18 months ago. Your mother knew about it. It was not a question. Adrian watched him break the roll into small pieces. The work order was approved through one of her private accounts. Evan dipped a piece into the honey, but did not eat it. Does that surprise you? Everything about that room surprises me. That isn't what I asked. Adrian almost answered with a warning. Few people spoke to him that directly, and none did it while sitting in his house under his protection. But Evan was not one of his men. That distinction was beginning to matter. Yes, Adrian said. It surprises me. Evan ate the bread. Adrian waited. Silence had once felt like resistance. Now he was beginning to understand it could also be a choice. After a minute, Evan said, "She used to bring food herself." Adrian kept his hand still. "My mother?" Evan nodded. "Not every time, but at first." This was more than Evan had offered since being found. Adrian resisted the urge to fill the space with questions. "What did she call herself?" "Mrs. Cross." "Did she tell you who I was?" Evan's gaze shifted to the unopened letter beside him. "Only that you were her son." Adrian waited again. Evan glanced at him, perhaps expecting pressure. When none came, he continued. "She knocked before she came in. 3 times. Even when the door wasn't locked." The detail landed harder than Adrian expected. His mother had always knocked 3 times on his office door, even when he was 12 and the office was a desk beneath the stairs. It had been her way of saying she knew he wanted privacy, even if the entire house belonged to her. Was the door locked when she was alive? Adrian asked. Evan's jaw tightened. "Sometimes." "From which side?" Evan set the bread down. Adrian heard the change in the room before Evan spoke. "You said I didn't have to answer everything." "You don't. Then stop making every silence feel like a test." The words were quiet, but they struck cleanly. Adrian could have defended himself. He could have pointed out that someone inside his home had hidden a man behind false walls and secret plumbing. Instead, he stood. Evan's shoulders stiffened. Adrian crossed to the door, not to close it, but to move the chair that partly blocked the opening. He placed it against the opposite wall. "You're right." Evan watched him closely. "That easy?" "No." Adrian returned to the window. "But still true." Evan stared at the cleared doorway for a moment, then picked up the bread again. The conversation did not continue, but it had changed something. Adrian had lost an answer. Evan had kept a boundary. Neither of them had been punished for it. Later that afternoon, Dr. Mercer cleared Evan to walk short distances with a cane. Adrian had 3 brought upstairs. Evan rejected the polished black one, frowned at the silver-handled one, and selected the cheapest wooden cane. "That one is temporary," Adrian said. "So am I." The reply came too quickly to be casual. Adrian felt something tighten beneath his ribs. "You have 2 options when Mercer clears you," he said. "The clinic under another name, or somewhere you choose that I can secure." Evan tested the cane against the floor. "You left yourself out. I assumed this house wasn't your first choice." "It isn't." "Then I won't make it one." Evan looked at him for a long time. "Why?" Adrian considered giving the efficient answer, because forcing Evan to remain would make cooperation impossible. It was true, but incomplete. "Because you asked for an open door." Evan's expression softened by a fraction. He took 3 careful steps, stopped, then turned toward the hallway. "I want to see the room." Adrian's first instinct was immediate refusal. Mercer had warned against strain. Nolan had not finished processing the space. Whoever maintained the hidden room might still be in the house. Every practical reason said no. Evan must have seen the answer forming because his grip tightened around the cane. "Not today," Adrian said. "Tomorrow, if Mercer agrees. You choose who comes with us." Evan blinked. "Us? I need to see what you notice." That surprised them both. Adrian had treated Evan as the object of the investigation. Now, for the first time, he was asking him to become part of it. Evan looked toward the open hall, then back at the letter on the bed. "There's something behind the inner panel," he said. "Something she told me never to touch unless you were there." Adrian felt every unanswered question in the house shift toward that single sentence. Evan did not explain further. This time, Adrian did not ask him to. Tomorrow, he said. Evan nodded, not with trust, but with the beginning of a decision they would have to make together. The next morning, Adrian returned to the hidden room with Evan, Dr. Mercer, and no one else. Evan had chosen the doctor himself. Nolan had objected until Adrian reminded him that choice was not a security flaw. It was the point. The room looked smaller in daylight spilling through the open doorway. Evan paused at the threshold, one hand wrapped around the wooden cane. His breathing changed. Adrian noticed, but did not reach for him. "We can leave," he said. Evan shook his head. "If I leave now, it stays her room." He stepped inside. "I need it to become evidence." Adrian followed at a distance. The empty water jug remained beside the cot. The folded wrappers had been sealed in clear bags. Everything else waited where they had found it, including the narrow cabinet against the back wall. Evan crossed to it slowly and crouched with care. The tap was behind here. Adrian moved the cabinet only after Evan nodded. A thin pipe ran through the plaster, exactly as Nolan's records had shown. Beside it was a rectangular metal panel with no visible handle. "She told me not to touch it," Evan said. "Not unless you were here." "Did she say why?" "She said opening it too early could get me killed." Mercer looked toward Adrian. "Comforting family tradition." Evan's mouth twitched despite himself. Adrian crouched beside the panel. A small biometric reader was hidden beneath the lower edge. He pressed his thumb against it. Nothing happened. Then Evan pointed to a second plate, almost invisible in the wall. "Both," he said. Adrian looked at him. "She expected us to open it together." Evan placed his hand on the second reader. The lock released. The sound was quiet, but Evan flinched anyway. Adrian opened the panel. Inside sat a compact medical kit, a burner phone, several envelopes, and a black ledger bound with an elastic strap. There was also a key card bearing the crest of the Cross household. Adrian recognized the clearance level immediately. Only 4 people had ever possessed access that high. His mother had been one of them. Adrian was another. The remaining 2 names hit him with the force of a physical blow. Evan washed his face. "You know what that means. It means whoever supplied this room didn't need to break into the house." Adrian picked up the ledger. The entries were sparse. Dates, quantities of food, medication, water maintenance. Most were marked with his mother's initials. The final 6 were not. They bore only a single letter. And Adrian's mind moved at once toward Nolan, then stopped. Too obvious. Too convenient. The initial could mean a person, a location, or nothing at all. "Don't decide before you know," Evan said quietly. Adrian looked at him. "You think I'm deciding?" "I think that's what you do when uncertainty makes you angry." The observation should have irritated him. Instead, it reminded him why Evan needed to remain part of this. Adrian handed him the ledger. "Then tell me what I'm missing." Evan studied the dates. The food stopped 3 days before the water. His finger rested on the final entry. Whoever was maintaining the room didn't vanish all at once. They withdrew in stages. "Or wanted you weak before the tap failed." Mercer's voice was clinical, but Evan's shoulders tightened. Adrian felt the old urge to take the ledger, end the discussion, remove Evan from the room. He stayed where he was. "What do you think?" he asked Evan. Evan swallowed. "I think your mother expected the room to keep me alive until you found me." He looked around at the bare walls. "But I don't think she expected it to become permanent." Adrian's gaze fell to the burner phone. It powered on when he pressed the side button. One saved audio file appeared on the screen. The date was 2 weeks before his mother's death. Adrian pressed play. Her voice filled the room, weaker than he remembered, but unmistakably hers. "If you are hearing this, Adrian, then I failed to tell you myself." Evan went still. Adrian did not look at him. "The young man with you is not your enemy. He is under my protection because someone within our household has been searching for him. I believed secrecy would keep him alive. I also believed I would have more time." The recording paused beneath a shallow breath. "Do not trust the first explanation you are given, and do not mistake keeping him hidden for having kept him safe." The file ended. For several seconds, none of them moved. Adrian stared at the phone. His mother had known, not only about Evan, but about the danger inside the house. She had built the room to protect him, then left him inside a system that had continued after she died. Protection and confinement had occupied the same space. The distinction Adrian had wanted was gone. "She knew what this was doing to you," he said. Evan's expression closed. At the end, maybe. And you still kept the letter. She asked me to give it to you. That isn't what I asked. Evan looked toward the open door. Adrian heard his own tone and forced it lower. Why did you trust her? I didn't. The answer came without hesitation. I trusted that she was afraid. That changed the shape of everything. His mother had not hidden Evan because she believed Adrian was the danger. She had hidden him because she believed someone close enough to enter her private wing was. But fear had driven her to make choices for Evan, and those choices had outlived her intentions. Adrian reached for the sealed letter, then stopped before touching it. Do you want to open it? Evan asked. Not without you. Evan's eyes searched his face. It has your name on it. It was in your hand. Adrian stood and offered no command, only the decision. We read it together, or we wait. Evan looked down at the envelope for a long moment. Then he slipped one finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet and a smaller envelope marked with Evan's name. Adrian read only the first lines before his pulse slowed into something colder than anger. His mother had written that the danger was tied to the Cross organization, that Evan's identity could expose a chain of decisions made without Adrian's knowledge, and that the people protecting those decisions would not stop because she was dead. The rest referred to documents not contained in the room. It was not an answer. It was a direction. Adrian handed the smaller envelope to Evan without asking to see it. Evan stared at it, then at him. You're not going to demand I open it? No, even if it affects your investigation? Adrian glanced at the unlocked door. Then you decide when it becomes part of the investigation. Something in Evan's face shifted, not trust completed, but trust given room to exist. Mercer stepped back toward the hall, granting them privacy without being asked. Adrian closed the ledger and looked at Evan. This is no longer about proving what happened in that room. What is it about? Adrian thought of the clearance card, the missing supplies, and his mother's warning not to accept the first explanation. Then he thought of Evan checking every lock before taking a single bite of food. Finding out who decided your life was acceptable collateral, he said, and making sure neither of us lets them decide what happens next. Evan held his gaze. After a moment, he nodded. It was not obedience. It was agreement. Outside the room, somewhere deeper in the house, a secure access alarm began to sound. The secure access alarm cut through the room with a sharp electronic pulse. Adrian moved first. He took the burner phone and ledger, then looked at Evan. Stay with Mercer. Evan's expression hardened. You just said neither of us decides alone. This is an active breach. And that makes me furniture? The alarm sounded again. Adrian's instinct was to end the argument with an order. Instead, he forced himself to ask, can you move quickly? Evan adjusted his grip on the cane. Quickly enough to notice things your armed men miss. Mercer exhaled through her nose. He has a point. Adrian did not enjoy being outvoted in his own house. He enjoyed even less that Evan's answer had been accurate. You stay behind me, he said. That was almost a request. Don't get used to it. Evan's mouth lifted as they stepped into the hall. The alarm originated from the archive corridor below his mother's wing. Nolan was already there with two guards, one hand pressed to his earpiece. Someone used a retired clearance card at the private records room, he said. Adrian held up the card from the hidden panel. This one. Nolan's face changed for less than a second. Evan noticed. Adrian knew because Evan's gaze shifted from the card to Nolan's right hand, where his thumb had stopped tapping against his leg. The access registered 30 seconds before the alarm, Nolan said. No one entered through the corridor. Then they came another way, Evan said. Nolan looked at him as though the cane had spoken. You should be upstairs. Evan leaned slightly toward Adrian without taking his eyes off Nolan. He says that when he wants people quiet, doesn't he? Adrian almost smiled. Frequently. Nolan's jaw tightened. Boss, open the room. The archive door showed no damage. Inside, drawers stood closed, shelves undisturbed, and the central terminal glowed with a canceled login attempt. Adrian scanned the room. Too clean. Too controlled. Evan remained near the threshold, studying the floor instead of the cabinets. There, he said. A narrow trail of dust had been disturbed beneath the last shelving unit. Adrian crouched and found a recessed latch. The shelf released from the wall, revealing a service passage barely wide enough for one person. Nolan swore under his breath. That isn't on the plans. Neither was the plumbing, Evan said. Adrian looked at him. Evan shrugged carefully. Your mother liked hidden architecture. The passage was empty, but a warm security badge lay on the floor. The printed name had been scraped away. Its embedded chip carried the same clearance tier as the card in Adrian's hand. Someone had entered, attempted to access the records, then escaped before they arrived. More important, they had known where to go as soon as the hidden panel was opened. Adrian turned to Nolan. Lock down the estate. Evan's shoulders tightened. Adrian saw it immediately. Internal perimeter only, he added. No doors in the residential wing are locked. No one enters Evan's room. Nolan hesitated, then nodded. It was a small correction, but Evan noticed that too. Back upstairs, Mercer insisted Evan sit before his ankle. Swelled further. Adrian brought the ledger and phone into the sitting room adjoining the guest suite. Evan settled onto the sofa with the smaller envelope still unopened in his pocket. You were right about the shelf, Adrian said. I know. Most people pretend humility when I compliment them. That sounds exhausting for everyone. Adrian sat across from him. For a few minutes, the alarm system clicked softly through its reset cycle. Evan looked toward the window. I used to repair old radios, he said. Adrian waited, sensing the importance of the admission. Before the room? Before all of this? Evan rubbed his thumb along the cane handle. I liked finding the one broken connection everyone else missed. That explains the shelf. It explains why your security chief doesn't like me. Nolan doesn't like variables. Evan glanced at him. And you? Adrian thought of the open guest room door, the letter he had not taken, the way Evan had stepped into danger because being excluded felt too much like confinement. I'm reconsidering them. Evan's expression softened. Dangerous habit. Apparently. The quiet between them felt different now. Not empty. Not guarded. Adrian told him about his mother's 3 knocks in the desk beneath the stairs. It was a small memory, almost embarrassing in its ordinariness. Evan listened without interrupting. She knocked for me too, he said, even when she was frightened. That doesn't excuse the room. No, Evan met his eyes. But it means she knew permission mattered. She just stopped trusting it when she got scared. The words landed too close to something Adrian did not want to examine. He looked away first. By evening, the estate's search had found no intruder. Nolan reported that the erased badge had been activated remotely from inside the household network. Whoever had triggered the breach still had access, or knew someone who did. Adrian ordered additional guards around the wing, then caught Evan watching him from the doorway. How many? Evan asked. 4. I won't sleep with 4 men outside. They won't be outside your room. How far? Adrian named the intersection at the end of the corridor. Evan considered it. 2. 3. 2. And the door stays open. Adrian should have refused. The breach had proven the threat was active. Yet Evan was standing without support now, tired but steady, negotiating rather than retreating. 2, Adrian said, and a silent censor at the stairwell. Evan nodded. That I can live with. The phrase struck Adrian harder than it should have, not because Evan had agreed, but because he had chosen the terms. Later, Adrian found him at the small dining table, working through a bowl of soup while studying a copy of the ledger. You're supposed to rest. You're supposed to stop giving orders disguised as concern. Adrian placed a second bowl on the table and sat opposite him. Evan looked at it. Did the chef put herbs in yours? He values his position. Evan laughed, quiet and surprised, and the sound changed the room. Then his eyes returned to the ledger. The final entries marked in, he said. They're spaced differently from the others. Same supplies, different intervals. Meaning, your mother's system was being copied by someone who didn't understand why she built it. Adrian leaned closer. Evan pointed to the dates. Their shoulders nearly touched. Neither moved away. The last delivery happened after she died, Evan said. Someone continued protecting me. Then someone else decided to stop. Adrian felt the warmth of Evan beside him and the cold logic of the conclusion at the same time. Whoever had cut the food and water knew Evan was alive. Whoever had triggered the archive alarm knew Adrian had begun looking. Adrian straightened. You're not leaving this wing tonight. Evan's face closed. Adrian heard the command too late. That wasn't. It sounded exactly like what it was. Outside, Nolan's men took their new positions. Inside, the open door remained between Evan and the hall. Adrian looked at the space, then at the fear he had just put back into Evan's eyes. The threat had become personal. So had Adrian's need to keep him safe. And for the first time, those two facts no longer felt like the same thing. Adrian let the silence sit between them. He could have corrected himself, softened the order, pretended the fear in Evan's face was an overreaction. Instead, he looked at the open door and saw how little that opening meant if every other choice had already been made for him. "You're right," Adrian said. Evan's expression did not change. "About which part?" "It was an order." Adrian placed both hands flat on the table, keeping them where Evan could see. "And I'm withdrawing it." Evan glanced toward the hallway. "So I can leave the wing?" The answer rose in Adrian immediately. No. The estate had just been breached. Someone inside the household network was watching them move. Evan's name, face, and condition were still unknown to most of Adrian's organization, and that secrecy was the only advantage they had left. "Not alone," Adrian said. Evan's jaw tightened. "That isn't withdrawing it. It's the limit I can give you tonight." "You mean the limit you're willing to give me?" Adrian stood too quickly. The chair scraped across the floor. Evan flinched, then went still, angry at himself for it. Adrian hated that more than the argument. "Someone cut off your food and water," he said. "Someone triggered the archive alarm within minutes of us opening that panel. I am not pretending this house is safe because you need the door to feel open." Evan rose with the cane. "And I'm not pretending this is freedom because the room is nicer." The words landed cleanly. Adrian felt them strike the locked room, the hidden tap, his mother's recorded warning. Do not mistake keeping him hidden for having kept him safe. "2 guards," Adrian said. "No locked doors. You can use the library, the sitting room, the east terrace. Mercer goes with you if you leave the floor." Evan stared at him. "You made a map of where I'm allowed to exist. I made a perimeter. That's what people call a cage when they own the building." Adrian looked away before anger made the choice for him. "Tonight," he said. "We revisit it in the morning. You revisit it. I live inside it." Evan picked up the ledger. Adrian's attention snapped to it. "Leave that here." "Why?" "Because it's evidence. Evidence about me. Evidence connected to a breach." Evan held it tighter. "You said I was part of this." "You are. Until I disagree." "Adrian." "Step closer." Evan backed toward the open door. The distance between them changed the room before either spoke again. Adrian stopped. "I'm not taking it from you." "But you want to." "Yes." Evan's eyes flicked to his hands. "At least that's honest." He carried the ledger into the guest room and closed the door himself. The click was quiet. Adrian stood outside it, staring at the wood. It was not locked. Somehow that made it worse. An hour later, Nolan arrived with news from the network audit. The remote activation had come through a terminal in the staff administration office. 12 people had access. 3 were off-site. 4 had worked for Adrian's mother. 1 had disappeared before the lockdown. "Name?" Adrian asked. "Mara Voss. Former night nurse. She handled medication deliveries during your mother's final year." Adrian remembered a woman with silver glasses and a voice that never rose. "Find her." Nolan hesitated. "There's more. She accessed transportation records tied to a private clinic outside the city. Same week your mother died." Adrian's first thought was Evan. A route out. A missed transfer. A plan that failed. His second was that Evan needed to hear it. He went to the guest room door and knocked 3 times. No answer. He knocked again. "Evan." Silence. Adrian opened the door. The room was empty. The window was closed. The bathroom door stood open. The cane was gone. So was the ledger. Adrian's pulse turned cold. He crossed the room and found the keys still on the bedside table. Beside it lay a folded note in Evan's handwriting. "I'm not running. I'm checking something you wouldn't let me check." Adrian crushed the first response before it reached his mouth. "Nolan." The security chief appeared in the doorway. "Lock the exterior gates." Adrian looked at the note again, then at the open hall. "Do not lock the residential wing." Nolan gave him a sharp glance, but obeyed. Camera feeds showed Evan moving slowly through the east corridor toward the old service stairs, using the cane with one hand and carrying the ledger beneath his jacket. Adrian reached the stairwell before him. Evan stopped 2 steps above, breathing hard. "Move," he said. "No, the dates in the ledger match the clinic transfers. There may be a route through the old laundry tunnel. You could have told me. You would have said no. Because you can barely manage stairs. Because you think danger gives you the right to decide what happens to me." Adrian climbed 1 step. Evan's grip tightened on the rail. Adrian stopped again. "Give me the ledger." "No, Evan. That's not a request." The alarm at the base of the stairwell flashed red. Someone had opened the service entrance below. Adrian heard movement on the other side of the steel door. He reached for Evan. Evan recoiled, lost his footing, and struck the rail hard enough to cry out. Adrian caught his arm before he fell. Evan froze in his grip. For one terrible second, neither moved. Then Evan pulled away. "Don't." Adrian released him immediately. The steel door below slammed once from the other side. Nolan's men rushed in, weapons drawn. The intruder fled before the outer team could intercept, leaving behind a dropped access fob and a strip of medical tape marked with Mara Voss's initials. Evan looked at it, then at Adrian. "She was trying to get back in. Or lure you out," Adrian said. "You don't know that. Neither do you." Adrian took the ledger from the stair where it had fallen. Evan did not fight him this time. That surrender felt worse than resistance. Mercer arrived and examined Evan's ankle while Adrian stood several feet away. No fracture, only aggravated swelling. The immediate danger had passed. The damage between them had not. "You're moving to the secured suite," Adrian said. Evan laughed once, without humor. "Of course I am. It has reinforced access and a private exit." "Does the private exit open from my side?" Adrian hesitated. Evan saw the answer. "Then it isn't an exit." Adrian changed the order. "Remove the exterior lock." Nolan stared at him. "That defeats the room." "Remove it." Evan looked up, surprised despite himself. It was a small concession, too small for what had happened. Adrian knew that. He also knew the threat was real, the breach active, and fear was closing around his judgment faster than he could stop it. By midnight, Evan was inside the secured suite with the door unlocked and 2 guards beyond the stairwell. He had not spoken to Adrian since the service entrance. Adrian stood outside, listening to the silence on the other side. He had protected Evan from the intruder. He had also proven every fear Evan had carried out of the locked room. And now, for the first time, Evan was not watching Adrian to see whether he could be trusted. He had already decided he could not. By morning, Adrian had removed every guard from the hallway outside Evan's suite. The exterior perimeter remained sealed, the service tunnels watched, and Nolan's team still searched for Mara Voss. But the corridor itself was empty. Adrian stood outside Evan's unlocked door and knocked 3 times. No answer came. He did not enter. Instead, he placed the room key, the black ledger, and a printed copy of every security report on the floor. Then he sat against the opposite wall and waited. 40 minutes passed before the door opened. Evan stood with one hand on the frame, his injured ankle wrapped beneath loose sweatpants. He looked first at Adrian, then at the documents. "What is this?" "Everything I have." Evan's gaze sharpened. "Everything you decided I'm allowed to see?" Adrian accepted the hit. "Everything." He pushed himself to his feet, but stayed across the hall. "The camera records. The access logs. Mara's employment file. The clinic transfer schedule. Nolan's preliminary report. The original renovation invoices. And the ledger? Yours to review. Not mine to take." Evan stared at him. "You already took it." "Yes." Adrian did not offer an excuse. "I was wrong." The apology did not soften Evan's face. It should not have. Adrian had spent years believing that acknowledging a mistake was the same as correcting it. Evan had taught him otherwise without intending to. "The guards," Evan asked, "move to the exterior stairwells. They won't enter this floor unless you call, or there is an immediate breach. You still decide what counts as immediate." "For now." Adrian held his gaze. "But I won't decide what happens to you." Evan looked down at the papers. "That sounds convenient after you already did." "It isn't convenient." Adrian's voice remained quiet. "It is late." For the first time, anger left Evan's expression and something more tired replaced it. Late is not the same as useless. He picked up the ledger and reports, then closed the door. Adrian stood alone in the hall. The lock did not turn. That was the only mercy he had earned. In his mother's study, Adrian played the recording again. Do not mistake keeping him hidden for having kept him safe. He had heard the warning as an accusation against whoever maintained the room. Now he heard his own name inside it. His mother had feared someone would find Evan, so she had removed his choices. Adrian had feared the same thing and done the same. The difference between them was not intention. It was whether he chose to stop. Nolan entered carrying a thin folder. "We traced Mara's clinic transfer. She reserved a private room under Evan's initials the day before your mother died." Adrian opened the folder. "She meant to move him." "Possibly. But the transfer was canceled from inside the Cross network 6 hours after your mother's death." By whom? The authorization used your credentials. Adrian looked up. Nolan's face remained controlled, but his shoulders were rigid. I never approved it. I know. Do you? Adrian asked. Nolan went silent. The system Adrian trusted had not merely failed. Someone had used Adrian's authority as camouflage. His mother had hidden Evan from that system. Adrian had then placed Evan back inside it and called the result protection. Find Mara, Adrian said. No force unless she threatens someone. Nolan frowned. She may have tried to enter the estate. Or she may have tried to reach the room she once maintained. You're taking Evan's interpretation. I'm refusing to choose one before we know. Nolan studied him, then nodded and left. The choice felt smaller than Adrian expected. No victory, only the absence of another mistake. That afternoon, Dr. Mercer found Adrian in the kitchen staring at a bowl of soup he had not touched. He asked me about the clinic, she said. I told him it exists. Adrian looked at her. Did he ask to go? He asked whether leaving would put anyone else in danger. That was Evan, still, measuring his freedom by its cost to others. Adrian set the spoon down. What did you tell him? That it wasn't my decision. Mercer leaned against the counter. You should try that answer sometime. I have. Once. It has been an unpleasant morning. She almost smiled, then turned serious. He doesn't need you to disappear, Adrian. He needs you to stop making silence do the work of consent. The sentence followed him back upstairs. Evan's door was open now. He sat at the small table with the ledger, reports, and his unopened envelopes spread before him. Adrian stopped at the threshold. May I come in? Evan looked up. The pause lasted long enough to hurt. Yes. Adrian entered and remained standing until Evan pointed to the second chair. The canceled clinic transfer, Evan said. Your credentials were used. Without my knowledge. I believe you. The words should have felt like relief. Instead, they felt undeserved. Evan tapped one of the dates. Mara wasn't cutting off the supplies. She was trying to move me before your mother died. That is one possibility. And after the transfer was canceled, someone kept the room running just long enough to make it look maintained. Adrian followed the sequence. The irregular entries. Food delivered at wider intervals. Water left operational until the final days. Not rescue. Containment. Someone wanted you alive, Adrian said, but unable to leave. Evan's expression tightened. That is what everyone keeps calling protection. Adrian did not defend himself. What do you want to do? Evan's fingers rested over the smaller envelope. I want to open this. Alone. Adrian nodded. Then I'll leave. He stood. And after that, I decide what becomes evidence. Agreed. Adrian reached the doorway before Evan spoke again. You know I may choose the clinic. Adrian held the frame, but did not turn around immediately. The old fear came fast. Evan beyond his walls, beyond his reach, exposed to whoever had used Adrian's credentials. Every instinct told him to make the decision first and apologize later. He let the fear exist without obeying it. I know. And you'll let me go? Adrian faced him. I'll give you every fact I have. I'll tell you what I think the risks are. But yes. Evan searched his face. Even if you think I'm wrong? Especially then. The room fell quiet. Evan's eyes dropped to the envelope. I don't forgive you. I know. I don't trust you the way I did yesterday. Adrian felt the truth of that and did not look away. I know that too. Evan nodded once. Not reconciliation. Not permission to hope. Only acknowledgement that Adrian had finally stopped demanding an outcome. Adrian stepped back into the hall. Behind him, the door remained open. A few minutes later, he heard the soft tear of paper. At the far end of the corridor, Nolan approached with his phone in hand. We found Mara, he said. She wants to speak to Evan. Not you. Adrian looked toward the open suite. Yesterday, he would have decided whether that meeting happened. Today, for the first time, he knew exactly whose decision it had to be. Adrian looked toward Evan's open door. Tell her he decides where and how. Nolan's eyebrows lifted. Mara may be compromised. Then give Evan the same information you gave me. Adrian stepped aside. Not an order. A choice. Nolan studied him for a moment, then crossed the hall and stopped at the threshold instead of entering. Evan emerged 10 minutes later carrying the smaller letter and the black ledger. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. I'll meet her. Adrian forced himself not to ask what the letter said. Where? The private clinic. Neutral ground, medical security, 2 exits. Evan looked at Nolan. Your people secure the outside. No one enters the room unless I ask. Nolan glanced at Adrian. Adrian said nothing. After a beat, Nolan nodded to Evan. Understood. The clinic sat beyond the city limits behind a line of cedar trees. Mara Voss was waiting in a consultation room with silver glasses, tired eyes, and both hands visible on the table. Evan chose Mercer to remain inside. Adrian stayed behind the observation glass where Evan could see him, and where he could not hear unless Evan activated the speaker. It was the hardest position Adrian had ever accepted, close enough to intervene, powerless unless invited. Mara's gaze settled on Evan. I am sorry. Evan did not sit. For which part? For leaving you there. You kept bringing food. After your mother died, yes. I believed I could complete the transfer. Mara looked toward the glass, then back at Evan. Someone canceled it using Adrian's credentials. They warned me that moving you would expose everyone connected to you. Evan placed his mother's letter on the table. And when did keeping me alive become keeping me hidden? Mara lowered her eyes. When I became afraid enough to call it protection. Adrian felt the words through the glass, even without sound. Evan opened the speaker. He needs to hear the rest. Mara flinched when Adrian entered, but Evan remained standing between them by choice, not placement. Your mother discovered that senior members of the organization were using Omega medical registries to identify vulnerable people, Mara said. They traded access, leverage, and silence. Evan found proof while repairing communications equipment at one of their clinics. Evan's former skill. The broken connection everyone else missed. She hid him before they could erase him, Mara continued. She planned to expose them after securing his testimony and moving him beyond their reach. Then she died. Names, Adrian said. Mara slid a data drive across the table. The records are there. So are the authorizations. Nolan's name is not among them. Adrian did not touch the drive. He looked at Evan. Do you want it entered into evidence? Mara stared at him. Evan did too. You're asking me? It concerns your identity, your records, and what was done to you. It also concerns your organization. That does not make it mine. Evan placed his hand over the drive. For several seconds, fear moved visibly through him. Shallow breath, rigid shoulders, fingers pressing into the plastic. Then he picked it up. I want copies sent to Mercer, an independent attorney, and every affected clinic before anyone in the Cross organization knows we have it. Adrian's instincts objected to every uncontrolled copy. He let them. Done. Nolan's voice came through Adrian's earpiece before they left the room. We have movement outside. 3 vehicles. Unauthorized. Approaching the south entrance. Mara went white. They followed me. Adrian reached for his weapon, then stopped long enough to face Evan. The armored exit leads to the rear lot. You can leave with Mercer now. My people will cover you. Evan gripped the drive. And you? I end this. By deciding for me again? By giving you the safest route I have. Evan held his gaze. Then give me the other routes too. Adrian told him. The armored exit, the service corridor, or the records wing where the clinic's secure transmission terminal could distribute the files. The third option was the most dangerous. It was also the only one that prevented the approaching men from burying the evidence if Adrian failed. I choose the terminal, Evan said. Every part of Adrian wanted to refuse. He imagined hands on Evan, another locked room, another failure hidden behind good intentions. Then he remembered the key on the guest room table and the silence after Evan stopped watching him for trust. Adrian removed his secure access card and placed it in Evan's hand. Mercer goes with you. Nolan sends 2 people you approve. Evan looked down at the card. And if I tell you to pull your men back? I pull them back. Even if you think I'm wrong? Adrian's chest tightened. Especially then. Evan nodded once. The clinic alarm began to pulse. This time, they moved in opposite directions because they had chosen different responsibilities, not because one of them had been sent away. Adrian met the intruders in the south corridor with Nolan and 4 guards. He recognized 2 of the men as senior enforcers who had served his mother. Their leader raised empty hands. This can still be contained, Adrian. That word has done enough damage. You would destroy your own structure for 1 Omega? Adrian heard the old language clearly now. 1 Omega, 1 liability, 1 acceptable cost. No, he said. I'm destroying the part of it that believes people are structure. The man reached inside his jacket. Nolan moved first. The confrontation ended in seconds. 1 gunshot into the ceiling, 2 men disarmed, the third pinned against the wall. Adrian's earpiece clicked. Evan's voice came through, breathless but clear. The files are transmitting. Do you need help? Adrian asked. Not yet. Not yet meant Evan controlled the answer. Adrian ordered every implicated account frozen and every loyal unit given the evidence simultaneously. He did not bury the scandal to preserve his authority. He used his authority to make burial impossible. By the time police and independent counsel arrived, the network had fractured in the only direction that mattered, away from those who had profited from silence. Evan came down the corridor with Mercer beside him, Adrian's access card still in his hand. He stopped several feet away. Adrian wanted to cross the distance. He stayed where he was. It's done, Evan said. Your choice made it possible. Evan looked at the restrained men, then at the card. Our choices did. He held it out. Adrian closed Evan's fingers around it instead. Keep it until you decide where you're going. Evan's eyes lifted to his. There was no forgiveness in them yet, but there was no surrender either. I may still choose the clinic, he said. I know. Or somewhere you can't secure. Fear moved through Adrian, sharp and immediate. He did not turn it into an order. Then I'll give you the information you need to secure it yourself. Evan studied him for a long moment before slipping the card into his pocket. The crisis had ended. The door between them had opened again. Adrian did not step through it. This time, he left that choice to Evan. 3 days after the clinic, Evan asked to see the hidden room one last time. Adrian did not ask why. He only told him the door would be open. The estate had changed in quiet, practical ways. The implicated accounts were frozen. Independent investigators had taken copies of the records. Mara had entered protective custody after giving a full statement. Nolan remained in charge of security, though every clearance system now required outside review. None of it erased what had happened. It only made repetition harder. Evan walked beside Adrian without the cane. His ankle still slowed him on the stairs, but he refused the offered elevator. You know, he said, most people build guest rooms without secret passageways. I've revised the architectural standards. That sounds threatening. The architect thought so. Evan's laugh was soft, but it no longer surprised him afterward. He let it remain in the air. The hidden room stood empty. The cot was gone. So were the wrappers, the water jug, and the metal panel's contents. The false cabinet had been removed, exposing the pipe and unfinished wall behind it. Sunlight from the hallway reached farther inside now that the bookcase had been taken down. Evan stopped at the threshold. Adrian stayed behind him. I thought I'd feel something dramatic, Evan said. Anger. Relief. What do you feel? Hungry. Adrian looked at him. Evan's mouth tilted. That was not symbolism. Mercer told me to stop skipping lunch. There's food downstairs. With herbs. The chef and I have reached a diplomatic settlement. Evan stepped into the room. He touched the wall where the inner panel had been, then slipped his hand into his jacket and removed the smaller letter from Adrian's mother. I read it, he said. Adrian waited. She apologized. Evan looked down at the paper. Not for hiding me from the people looking for me. For deciding fear gave her the right to keep deciding after I said I wanted out. Adrian's chest tightened. Did she explain why she never told me? She said she had evidence someone was using your credentials. She didn't know whether you were involved, compromised, or being watched. Evan folded the letter along its original crease. By the time she decided to trust you, she was too sick to finish the transfer herself. Adrian looked at the bare room, at the machinery of love and fear his mother had built into the walls. She should have told me. Yes. Evan's voice remained gentle. And she should have listened to me. Adrian nodded. Both truths fit. That was the part grief had resisted. He could love his mother without turning every choice she made into an act of wisdom. Evan placed the letter on the empty windowsill built into the hall-facing wall. I don't want to keep it. What do you want done with it? Archive it with the evidence. Not as an instruction. As a record. Adrian did not reach for it. I'll have Mercer's attorney handle it. Evan glanced at him. You're getting better at not touching things that aren't yours. It has been an exhausting period of personal growth. This time, Evan smiled fully. Downstairs, lunch waited at the small kitchen table rather than the formal dining room. Adrian had learned that Evan ate more when food did not arrive under silver covers. There was bread, soup, sliced pears, and a jar of honey left open between them. Evan chose his own bowl. He added too much pepper, ignored Adrian's expression, and ate until the tension in his shoulders disappeared. The simplicity of it moved Adrian more than he expected. The first time he had seen Evan drink, every swallow had looked like survival. Now Evan complained that the bread was overbaked. "I can have the chef replaced," Adrian said. "That is exactly the kind of reasonable response we've been working on." So no. Strong no. Adrian took another piece anyway. After lunch, he handed Evan a folder. Inside were the clinic discharge papers, an independent bank account funded from assets seized from the registry operation, identification documents restored under Evan's full legal name, and 3 housing options selected by Evan with Mercer's attorney. None belonged to Adrian. None required cross security. A 4th page listed the security risks honestly, without deciding for him. Evan read each line twice. "This apartment is 6 hours away." "Yes." "You hate that." "Yes." Evan looked up. "And this one has no cross personnel nearby." "Also yes." "You included it anyway." Adrian held his gaze. "You asked for choices." The room went quiet. Evan closed the folder. "I'm choosing the clinic apartment for now." The answer hurt. Adrian let it. "Nolan will arrange transportation with whoever you approve." "I don't want Nolan." "Then he won't arrange it." Evan studied him, perhaps waiting for resistance that did not come. "Mercer can drive me tomorrow." "All right." That evening, Evan packed the few things that were actually his. Adrian's coat lay folded on the bed where it had remained since the first night. Evan picked it up and carried it into the hall. Adrian stood near the stairs, hands at his sides. "This is yours," Evan said. "You can keep it." "I know." Evan held it for another moment, then placed it over Adrian's arm. "I'm still leaving tomorrow." "I know. I need to know what my life feels like when no one else is holding it together." Adrian's fingers tightened once against the coat. "I know." Evan looked toward the open front doors at the end of the hall. No guards blocked them. No lock waited on the other side. "And if I decide I don't want to come back?" Adrian made himself answer without looking away. "Then you don't." Evan's eyes shone, but he did not cry. "That's the first thing you've said that makes me want to." He left the next morning. Adrian did not follow. For 6 weeks, they spoke when Evan called. Sometimes about the investigation. Sometimes about nothing important. Adrian learned not to turn silence into emergency. Evan learned he could ask for help without signing away the rest of his life. On the 7th week, Adrian heard 3 knocks on his office door. Evan stood outside, holding a paper bag from the bakery across town. "The clinic apartment has terrible toast," he said. Adrian stepped aside. "That sounds serious." Evan entered, then stopped before the desk. "I'm not moving back into this house." "I didn't ask you to." "I know." He set the bag down. "I found a place in the city. My name is on the lease." "My key." Adrian nodded, though his pulse had begun to climb. "Good." Evan watched him. "I want you in my life." Adrian said nothing. He had learned that not every silence needed filling. "Not because of your mother," Evan continued. "Not because of the letter. Not because you found me." He came closer by his own choice. "Because when it mattered, you stopped holding the door." Adrian's voice was quieter than usual. "And if I get it wrong again? Then I tell you." Evan's expression softened. "And you listen?" "I will." That wasn't a question. Still true. Evan reached for his hand. Adrian let him decide the distance. Outside, the office door remained open. On the desk, the bakery bag released the warm scent of bread and honey into a room that had once belonged only to control. Evan was free to leave. Adrian was strong. Enough to let him. And because neither of them was trapped anymore, staying finally meant love.